Happy to have everybody here today. I'm Dusty Holman Sprague from the Maine Women's Lobby, and right now I'm joined by Joby Thoyalil from Maine Equal Justice, and who is also a member of the Permanent Commission on Racial, Tribal, and Indigenous Populations. So Joby, say hello.
Thanks, Dusty. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm a senior policy advocate with Maine Equal Justice, and for those of you who might not know, Maine Equal Justice is a legal services organization. We're based in Augusta, and we're similar to Pine Tree Legal, which a lot more people know because Pine Tree is all around the state. But we're different in that we don't take federal funding that prohibits us from working on policy. So prohibits us from other stuff too, like doing class action lawsuits and impact litigation, prohibits them, I should say. Maine Equal Justice was actually founded specifically because those prohibitions were put into the law in 1996, and folks at Pine Tree were saying, well, we still want to work on changing systems, and so they created Maine Equal Justice. And my role as a senior policy advocate means that I'm part of our policy team, and I'm spending a lot of time at the legislature, although in this case it's over Zoom, which is still don't know how that's supposed to work. But so I spend a lot of time working on bills and regulations with state government. And the last thing I should say about Maine Equal Justice is our mission is to find solutions to poverty. And so we work mostly trying to help people meet their most basic needs, both with our clients through our legal services, but also in the policies that we work on.
Thanks, Joby. And I actually did not know that connection about Pine Tree and Maine Equal Justice, so that's really cool. And of course, Maine Women's Lobby was founded in 1978 to support feminist and gender equitable public policy in Maine. We also work to help Mainers have the skills, resources, and confidence to engage in public policy change. So that's what we're up to here today. For folks who are either in the room, the Zoom room, or on the live stream, we are happy to have your questions. We have people monitoring the chat on both sides. You can also raise your hand if you're in the room. So if you have questions, please do feel free to share with us. We're happy to try to answer them. So Joby, tell me about LD2 and what this bill does.
Yeah, so what the bill does, I'm just pulling up my notes. So the bill is called an act to require the inclusion of racial impact statements in the legislative process. And the basic premise behind racial impact statements are that policies have an impact on basically racial disparities that we see in society that are in everywhere from our education system, our criminal justice system, income and wealth, poverty rates. I mean, we see disparities based on race and tribal status and ethnicity throughout our systems in the country, but also very much in Maine. And they're the result of a really complex set of factors, everything from generational poverty, access to resources, discrimination, overt racism, institutional racism. But one of the factors that we think that this bill will help address is the fact that policy can lead to racial disparities. And we have really infamous examples of that throughout history. And even though there are some really infamous examples, like the one that I've heard a lot in relation to this type of a bill, are the difference in mandatory sentencing between crack cocaine arrests and cocaine arrests, and how that is just, the data has more than borne out the fact that that has had a significant impact on increasing the number of Black people who are incarcerated. And that's just one example. The idea behind this bill is, as lawmakers are considering new laws, they have bills in front of them, legislation, that if they have a racial impact statement, which is essentially a statement that attempts to assess the potential impact that this bill would have on racial disparities. That they could prevent the next crack cocaine mandatory sentencing type of a legislation before it passes. And that's really important because it's really harder to undo a law once it's already been passed. That's the basic idea behind it. There's a lot more I can say, and I guess I will go into the structure of the bill. So
I was going to say, yeah,
racial impact statements.
It's an interesting bill structure. So like, talk to us about what this specific bill is doing to move it forward.
Yeah, so I think this bill is trying to account for some of the bigger challenges that that one would assume with a bill like this. So in Maine and in most legislative bodies, there are things like fiscal notes, which is, you know, every piece of legislation gets, or whether or not it's going to have a fiscal impact on the state budget. There are also, in other contexts, like environmental impact statements or economic impact statements. They all take evaluating these different topics to see if how the legislation is going to impact those topics, and therefore legislators will have the information they need to make an informed decision. Well, in order to do all of that, that takes work, that takes resources, that takes staffing, it takes expertise, and it takes time. And I'm just going to turn my light on because it's getting, natural light is getting dark. And so in trying to account for the fact that it takes time and resources and expertise, this bill is trying to get the process started. And so really all it's doing is, first it's saying that if there's a legislative committee that's reviewing a bill and thinks, hey, it would be really good if we had a racial impact statement, this bill would allow them to just make the request for relevant data. And so that request would most often go to agencies, so like the Department of Labor or the Department of Health and Human Services. And so that's one thing that the bill does, that's concrete, and that would happen right after it goes into effect. But the rest of the bill is really setting up this process to take us to a path where someday we will have, and by someday I mean 2023, the Maine legislature will have a system for evaluating bills for their racial impact. And the first step would be to conduct a study between this year, the 2021 session, and the 2022 session that would lead to a pilot. It would be I forget the details of what need to be the study, but the goal is for that to inform a pilot in 2022, where there may be, let's say, one or two legislative committees in particular, or there might be a specific process that involves a certain office within the legislature that does the analysis. The whole idea would be that let's try this out on a small scale and learn from that experience. And then with that learning, the following year, 2023, they would recommend a system for expanding it for the whole legislature. Or they might not. They might actually decide, well, actually, we just want to do this with the Criminal Justice Committee because that's the most relevant. I mean, this bill is not prescriptive in that regard. It leaves it up to the legislature going forward.
I think sometimes studies in the legislature get a bad rap. Like, people feel like a study is where good ideas go to die. But, you know, I actually think some things are really complicated, and a study can give you the time to think through the pieces and figure out how to put it into practice. We have a practice of requiring that every bill go through a fiscal analysis, as you just said, but we know how to do that, and we've figured out who does it, and they've developed the expertise. We don't have a practice of doing racial analysis, although we should start today. But figuring out how to build that practice, I think, takes time. So I think it's an interesting idea to move it forward like this. A couple of questions in the chat. One is, does this bill have a fiscal note? So we'll take that one first.
Yeah, so it hasn't gone through the fiscal analysis yet, so I don't know for sure. I do know that the sponsor does not believe that it will, because the first phase in the process is for the Legislative Council, which is the leadership body within the legislature. So that includes the Speaker of the House, the House Majority Leader, House Minority Leader, etc., and the same thing in the Senate. They make up this body called the Legislative Council. And the Legislative Council itself, as I understand it, has their own discretionary funding. And so I believe the intent is for the Legislative Council to use that discretionary funding to start this process, to do the first study and the pilot. And the bill specifically, the reason why this bill is actually a little bit better than just another study is that, yes, it says to study, but then it also says the Legislative Council shall institute a pilot, and that pilot shall inform their recommendations for the next legislature. So it's a little bit more than a study. The pilot would happen if this bill passes.
And I think, you know, this is sort of policy 101, but not everybody knows the difference between may and shall. And so when a legislative council may make a decision, it's really entirely up to them if and when or how. But if they shall make a decision, it's an obligation. And that's a really important distinction that I think sometimes people don't know if they're not sort of in this work in the day-to-day. There's also a question.
Yeah, thanks for flagging that.
Yeah, no problem. There's also a question about whether other states have done this.
Yes, so 7 states have done this, and they've been in existence since 2008 is the earliest I know of. I think Connecticut did it in 2008. Iowa did it in, I think, 2009. And other states off the top of my head include, you know what, I'm not going to do it off the top of my head. I'm going to look at my notes. Let's see, Iowa, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Minnesota, Oregon, and New Jersey. And they actually look really different in different states. And so we can go into that if people are interested.
I also see a question that is really interesting to me, particularly about data and the lack of really good data for decision making, particularly disaggregated data. I worked closely on data for anti-violence and victimization for a long time, and I know that once you start to look at disaggregated data, so that's data by different populations or by different regions, it sometimes paints a really different picture. And a great example is COVID, where at the beginning of the pandemic, we had quite low rates of people being diagnosed with COVID in Maine. But when you looked by race, and I'm sure folks are familiar with this story by now, that when you looked by race, we had dramatically 10 times as many diagnoses of COVID among the Black population in Maine. So that's an example of why we need disaggregated data. The question is, how do we get good enough data to make decisions, or what constitutes good data to make decisions to go into a racial impact statement?
This is going to be a really important question going forward, because data is a challenge. Data is a challenge for around the country, for all the other states that have done this and that are planning to do something like this. And my hope is that this process will include, and again, these details will be figured out as we go through the pilot phase and the first study, and then the second round of recommendations on what to do. But I hope that we'll land somewhere where this process will help identify where the data gaps are, and maybe even not only identify, but I would love it if a racial impact statement were to identify that there are too many data gaps, we're not able to do a racial impact statement, that leads to some other action. Maybe there's a study that comes out that says all the data gaps by race, and then that leads to the state trying to really figure out, well, what do we do about these data gaps? And yeah, I mean, I think the short answer, I haven't thought that idea through, but given that that's a little later in the process, I think that that's a great question, and I feel like pointing people towards how this process can help solve the data gaps would be the ideal.
Right. Do you want to share a little bit about what the similar laws in other states have looked like? It's a question from Megan in the chat.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure with these with how you structure these racial impact statements. There are a lot of states that have chosen to focus in specific topic areas, most commonly criminal justice. And that's because the disparities in the criminal justice realm are at least more well known than others, more stark than others in a lot of cases. So that's one difference. Whereas in Maine, this bill doesn't prescribe what topics to focus on, but I believe that it's the intent of the sponsor, just from talking to her, Representative Rachel Talbot Ross, that this would not be limited to just criminal justice, because there are disparities across our systems that I think that right now the hope amongst many of us who support this bill is that it would be much broader. Another interesting thing that other states have done is they've wrestled with the idea of who should actually do the analysis. So again, this bill LD2 doesn't specify who should do it. However, knowing our context here in Maine, knowing that we have an Office of Fiscal and Policy Review that do the fiscal analysis, we have an Office of Policy and Legal Analysis, I think we call it OPLA for short, might be able to do it because they're a nonpartisan body of the legislature that analyzes legislation. Other states have done things like that, or they've actually established separate commissions that it's part of the commission's role to do this kind of an analysis. And most often I've seen that in the criminal justice context. There are often like a sentencing commission, for example, or they might look at very specific questions. They might look at a set of data related to, let's say, sentencing, and they will establish a baseline of where the disparities lie. And then that's the question upon which they would do the analysis. Would this piece of legislation negatively or positively impact disparities by race in sentencing? So there are lots of different directions you can go. And yeah.
I think, part of what excites me about this is simply the idea of creating an obligation to consider it in the same way that we have an obligation to consider the fiscal impact. I mean, surely the racial impact is as important. What do you think some of the key challenges to this bill this session will be? What should people be aware of?
Yeah, so I named the fact that there's a lot of unknowns, there are data gaps. I think that those could be raised as reasons not to do it. I think that's where the structure of the bill is actually really smart, because it's not trying to say we know all those answers. It's actually saying, well, we agree there's a lot that's unknown, and the bill's just directing us to start figuring that out. But I think probably the biggest challenge, to be frank, is that we in society, the racism, racial disparity, structural racism is heavily politicized, unfortunately. And so I think it'll be a matter of convincing lawmakers that the problem even exists. And so if racial impacts are one tool in a set of tools to start to address structural racism, the problem of structural racism, first you need people to believe that structural racism exists. in order to support the bill.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And then we'll have sort of the cascading challenges as we move forward to make sure that, you know, the right decisions are made and that they choose to implement something moving forward, you know, in 2023.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any gender implications for this bill? You know, we think about gender as being tied to race, and I certainly don't think that that needs to be included in these impact statements, but I like to think of bills through a gender lens. So I wonder if you see any connections there.
I see the connection in, I mean, my understanding of the issues that the disparities you see, let's say, between men and women in income, for example, in employment, in poverty rates, you see the same disparities when those women are women of color. They are usually worse. I mean, it's the intersection between gender and race. It's a lot of the same disparities exist, and they exist. I think that if a racial impact statement is going to identify a disparity that exists based on race, that there's a very, very, very good chance that that same disparity exists based on gender, and that the women who are, I feel like I have a thought there, but I don't want to think out loud in front of all you folks and waste your time, but I feel like that there's something with the fact that the people that this bill is intending to protect happen to be people of color. You know, half of those people are women, and those women are, by the data, have the worst outcomes of everyone else in the state. And so I don't know if that quite gets at your question, but that's just where my mind is going.
I think it's great. And I think, you know, we know that as we sort of layer on oppressions, you know, whether it's gender or queer identities or Black and brown folks or, you know, ability, that we create more and more barriers to health and wellness, because that is how our policies and systems are structured. So I appreciate you grappling with that. What should know? We're coming toward the end too. So what should people know about this bill and what they can do, if anything, to help move it forward?
Well, the bill's having its public hearing next Wednesday, which it's always good to have a lot of people testify and support, and this is definitely no exception. We live in a state that is known for being one of the whitest states in the country, and so there may be a lot of lawmakers who not only don't believe that structural racism exists, but don't think that enough people in Maine care about it, because if it's 90+% white, why should they care? Well, if a lot of people are testifying and say we care, that's one clear way to counter that belief. And similarly, as the bill goes down the path beyond the public hearing, there's calling your legislator. Again, there are legislators in parts of the state like Portland and Greater Portland who have constituents of color and you know, maybe have less of a need to be convinced, whereas there are legislators in districts where they probably don't ever see a person of color in their district, and they might really not feel that any pressure to support a bill like this. But if they hear from their constituents that they do care about this, then that's the most powerful thing to move a lawmaker, is for them to hear from their constituents. So next Wednesday, now that everything's virtual, the rules have changed a little bit, and I believe you do need to sign up. I think ideally the day before, so on Tuesday, if you are planning to testify, and you would testify through Zoom. And if you can't testify, written testimony helps too. And there's a way to submit written testimony through the legislature's website.
I'll also draw folks' attention to the our website, and there are other places to find it as well, but Maine Women's Lobby has a range of tools on our website that include how to access the remote committees, how to submit testimony, there's an online bill tracker with, I think, 202 bills right now that we're tracking every Monday. So those tools might help people be able to connect and figure out how they can be a part of this work. So I also see in the chat, thank you to Representative Warren and to Kim Simmons, but we have some really great resources and comments too about the intersection between sexism and misogyny and racism, and how those are connected to structural issues like increased rates of incarceration among women, and particularly Black and Brown women. So thanks for those comments, I appreciate them. Anything else that people should know, Joby?
Just that this is a new policy to a lot of people. So if you are looking for help trying to understand it more, please feel free to email me. I can't guarantee I'll get back to you quickly before Wednesday just because things are busy, but I will try. And there are talking points that advocates are putting together, and I could try to share that with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm so sorry that the bill sponsor wasn't able to be here today, but Joby, you did a great job leading us through this conversation. I feel smarter now, and I appreciate you for it. Also, point folks to the mainewomen.org, our website. We're doing these bill bites every Thursday. So next week we'll have Anna Keller of Democracy Maine and Representative Peirce of Falmouth talking about online voter registration. Another really important structural issue to help people have access to systems change. So I think that's it then. Here we are, and I think we're ready to wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. I'm glad you could join us.